Invasive species, you may not realize some of the things that you like to look at in the woods are actually invasive species. Hello and welcome to WJTS in.form. I'm Bill Potter, your host. Joining me in the studio is Ron Rathfon. Ron is the forester for Purdue Extension. Your extension forester, I guess is the proper title?
That's correct.
Okay, and where are you based out of?
I'm at the Southern Indiana Purdue Agricultural Center, which is located just north of Patoka Lake Dam.
Now, one thing we do want to do, we're going to talk about this now, we're going to talk about at the end of the interview. There's an event coming up that really is open to everybody, and that is on May 7th, if you would tell us about that.
Sure, yeah. So actually, I'm also here representing an organization that's just now getting started called the Invasive Species Awareness Coalition of Du Bois County. And it's mainly a group of people, landowners and citizens who are concerned about this issue, as well as natural resource professionals, both from the private sector and representing public agencies like Indiana Department of Natural Resources, working in this local area. And so we have formed this organization to try to develop greater awareness in our community of the impact of invasive species and what local citizens can do to help in our fight against them.
Okay, and this is going to be held May 7th. Where will it be? Is there a cost?
Okay,
is there lunch? Is there, breakfast? How does that work?
Okay, so yeah, May 7th will begin at 9 o'clock at the Jasper River Walk at the gazebo there, right next to the river. And there is no cost. We just want volunteers to come to learn about invasive species and then also help with a habitat restoration project that we're doing on the Riverwalk. So we'll actually be out there with loppers and bow saws and pruning saws, cutting down some of this invasive brush that's encroaching upon the Riverwalk area.
That's great.
And so people will have an opportunity to do something good for nature as well as learn about this important issue.
So really, if you're somebody that enjoys the Riverwalk, if you don't come down and help, at some point that could just take over down there because these invasive species really get to be nasty over time.
Yeah, they do.
Okay, we're going to talk some more about that. Remind you that May 7th down at the Riverwalk at the gazebo is when it starts. What time was that again?
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock in the morning. Ron, when we talk about invasive species, a lot of people have really heard a lot about the emerald ash borer, which is an insect. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that, but you're more concerned about plants.
Right, Bill. So the emerald ash borer, I kind of like to think of it as the poster child of invasive species right now in the United States because number one, it's very recent. It's just kind of exploded on the scene here in the last 10 years, and it's been so well publicized. So most people are aware of the emerald ash borer, and its impacts are so immediate and so dramatic. Seeing all these ash trees suddenly dying is such a dramatic thing. But Bill, more insidious, I think, are the invasive plants because they're green, they're growing, and a lot of times they're pretty even. And so people don't recognize it as a threat. But I like to think of it as green pollution. Mm-hmm. It's green, and so most people don't see the problem with it, but they're fundamentally transforming our native habitats.
How do they get here in the first place? Are they naturally here, or are these things that were brought in? I think the honeysuckle was brought in as an ornamental plant, and then it just got out of control. Yeah,
right. So most invasive plants, I think, have been intentionally brought because of some kind of nice property that they have for either landscaping or maybe something really useful for conservation purposes like soil erosion control or wildlife habitat. And so they've been brought here without understanding the potential impact that they might have. They get planted and then they escape from where they're originally planted. Mm-hmm. And because they're so well adapted to the environment here, they just strongly compete with our native plants. And as if that's not enough, many of them wage chemical warfare against their neighboring plants. They actually produce chemicals that have herbicidal properties that inhibit the growth of other plants.
Wow, they're bad guys.
They are.
Well, what are some of these invasive species that are plants that people may not realize. If you walk through the woods, there's two that always come to my mind that if you're trying to walk freely through the woods, and that is honeysuckle.
Yeah.
Always gets in the way, or even in your landscaping, honeysuckle can create a nightmare. But that rose,
multiflora rose.
Talk about the invasive species that there are.
Yeah, some of the real bad actors in our area are those two that you mentioned. Also, some that perhaps are a little bit more recent are plants that are still widely sold for landscaping purposes. Okay. You can find them in our local nurseries, such as the Callery pear. Now these are the ornamental pears, so you may be familiar with Bradford, Cleveland pear, and some of the other cultivars. But the wild species is the Callery pear that came from China, and it was introduced in the early 20th century, but in more recent years it has been, certain cultivars have been widely cultivated and introduced into landscapes for landscaping purposes. They're beautiful. They have those beautiful symmetrical crowns, profuse blooms in the spring, beautiful fall foliage, but they produce lots of fruit that the birds carry all over the landscape and drop the seeds everywhere. And now we're seeing this wild form of Callery pear just cropping up everywhere. And it's a serious, serious threat to our native forest growth. The tree seedlings that we rely on to regenerate the forest cannot compete with that Callery pear.
Maybe it was just this year, but for some reason this year I noticed a lot of those white blooms in the forest before the trees really started growing, and I thought, well, what are those? And somebody said they're pears or they're wild cherries, but I guess they're pears.
Pear.
This is the first time I've noticed that many of them, so they're really starting to take over.
They are. They are.
And there's a little, I didn't realize, a little bitty pear that grows on those?
Yeah, so
okay,
the ornamental pears just have these tiny fruits. It's not
okay.
the nice large fruit that we like to eat. So it's the commercial pear that we eat is totally different, and it's not the problem. It's those ornamental pears.
Okay, what are some of the other plants that are?
Well, burning bush, and you may
really?
be surprised that
burning
bush is an invasive plant.
Wow.
And I'm seeing it more and more in the woods. Another one is these ornamental grasses, like the Chinese silver grass, I believe it's called. It's also known as miscanthus. And so we're starting to see that spreading in the natural environment. Yeah, a lot of these things were promoted as being sterile, meaning that they don't reproduce, they don't produce viable seed. And somewhere along the line, that's changing.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Because they are, one that we don't see a whole lot around here yet, I don't think. I've seen a lot when you go a little further south, and that's kudzu.
Right.
That really that can really, I've seen the whole hillsides just gone because of
the
that.
vine that ate the South.
Is that okay?
That's what it's been dubbed down south. Yeah. We do have kudzu in Indiana. Our climate here in Indiana has been such that it doesn't spread as aggressively as it does further south. It's kind of more of a warm-blooded plant, if you will. But we do have it, and there are some significant patches of it. If you go up to Shoals, there's a good-sized patch there. There's a 7-acre patch down in Evansville by the Metzger Park Zoo. So, if there's anything to the warming of our climate, we could see kudzu starting to expand more in the future.
What are some other ones that people may not realize? They may think, oh, these are really nice. I like having it in my woods, or I like having it in my field, but it's really an invasive species that needs to be controlled.
So what do you do about it?
Yeah. Well, and what are some of the other ones? Is there a mustard something or other?
Well, there's a garlic mustard. It's a biennial herb.
Does it have a little sticker on it, a little thorn?
No.
Okay, that must be a good one then. Okay. but garlic mustard is one?
Yeah, that's actually a forest plant.
Okay.
Grows in the forest understory. Japanese stiltgrass is another forest annual grass that produces just thousands and thousands of seed that are easily transported by people walking through it at the wrong time when the seeds are being dispersed. Another one is the tree of heaven.
Right, yes.
Also called Ailanthus. A very, very fast-growing tree that produces thousands and thousands of seeds that blow in the wind and rapidly colonize new open space and quickly take over an area.
And a lot of times that one you will see along the edge of a woods.
Yes.
They don't seem to grow deep in the woods, but on the edge, but eventually, I guess over time, they can start invading.
So, an intact forest is pretty resilient against invasion by these plants. But once a disturbance is created, maybe a tree blows down, maybe a storm goes through, knocks a number of trees down, or maybe a timber harvest. You have a timber harvest. This creates the opportunity for these invasive plants to move from the edge to the interior of the forest.
Is there any hope? Can we stop this? I guess maybe that's what May 7th is all about. But is there hope to stop invasive species?
Yeah, so what can you do? Well, I'd encourage folks that are interested in our natural environment and our habitats and trying to maintain them to join us in the Invasive Species Awareness Coalition, ISAC. Come on May 7th and learn more about it. Yes, there are things that we can do. And there are prevention things that we can do to keep those things from coming in to begin with. And one of those is stop planting those invasive plants in our landscapes. The Invasive Species Council of Indiana Invasive Species Council, has a comprehensive list of plants that are considered invasive in Indiana. And anybody can go to their website and look that up and double check to make sure that the plants they're thinking about buying aren't on that list. So
that would be the first thing, is to not plant them in the first place.
Exactly, yeah.
Is there a way to get rid of some of it? I know, like, if you have honeysuckle growing, it's hard to pull them out by the root.
Yeah.
And so when you cut them off, they keep growing back just in a couple of days. What can you do? Is there anything?
Well, first of all, I'd encourage anybody that's interested in controlling invasive species to call, either their local cooperative extension service or their DNR forester if they're a landowner, and get more information on it. They can also call me, and I'd be happy to share information on controlling invasive species, because each invasive species is a little bit different in the approach you take to try to control it. Quite often it may involve the use of an herbicide. I know lots of people don't like to use herbicides, and so we can try to figure out a non-chemical option. One of the things that I'm experimenting with is the use of goats for controlling invasive brush in the forest.
Okay.
So we're going into year 5 on that project, but we can at least minimize the amount of chemical that we would have to use.
Okay, now, if you want to take part in the May 7th event,
yes.
Do they need to bring anything? Do folks need to bring anything? Maybe a pair of gloves? Do they need to bring their own loppers? What?
Yeah, we'd encourage folks when they come to bring either loppers or a small handsaw and gloves. So that would be very helpful, yeah.
Okay, and that is on May 7th, starts at 9 o'clock in the morning at the gazebo on the riverfront in Jasper.
Right.
And you need help to I guess, clean up what is plants that are invading the Jasper Riverwalk, but it's a great time to learn what it's also doing in other areas in the county and throughout Indiana. All right. Ron, thank you very much for coming in. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so.
Okay, we just encourage you to watch for invasive plants, but take part in the event on May 7th, 9 o'clock at the Jasper Gazebo. Our guest has been Ron Rathfon. He is the Extension Forester for Purdue University, and he's based kind of around the Du Bois area. All right, give him a call if you have a question about the invasive species that may be growing in your area. This has been WJTS in Form. We are local people watching local people.